Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Archivist with myself, Analog. In this episode today, we're going to be talking about an article from 1912 titled, Is the American Indian of Hebrew Descent? A subject that I've discussed quite often throughout many of my videos and comes up frequently in Anomalous America. And looking back all along the Mississippi Valley and Mississippi River through all the states I've covered along there, nothing's more evident that it seems the history buried is quite relative when it comes to this topic. And, yeah, is America the promised land? And the idea that the Bible and the stories in the Bible transcribed here in America, Middle, North, and South America. As always, thanks for joining me. We're going to not waste any time here. Time is precious and very limited for me as of yet. An update on Anomalous America. Um, Incredibly busy here for the holidays, as I'm sure many of you are. And I don't want to commit to any um, AA shows that I probably won't be able to make. So we'll kick that back up in the beginning of the new year. Also, I have some pretty big announcements in January 2024 for the channel. So stay tuned for those. As always, love you guys. Thanks for being here. Let's jump right in. I already have a whole episode of um, the Radium series pretty much complete. So if there is a long episode or perhaps even a live stream, it'll be an impromptu one with very little notice. I'm going to try and do it tomorrow and we'll see how that goes. But if there's any more long term videos, it'll be a Radium episode, the title of which is Discovering the Philosopher's Stone. But yeah, where was I? Okay, let's go full screen. Like I said, this is The Sun newspaper, August 11th, 1912. We're going to zoom in on some images real quick. This is a stela from Central America. On the left, we have relief on the front of the Temple of the Sun. And on the right, we have portrait of the god Tylak on front of Temple of the Sun. I've mentioned both of these gentlemen previous videos. I've talked about the Queen Mu overlap between the quote Cain and Abel story, how that translates here. It's quite incredible. Queen Mu, Queen Isis, as she's also known, in her um, leaving the lands. She's also known as Queen Mud, which is very interesting. Leaving the lands of Central America and voyaging into the Mediterranean. And then I've correlated these stories of Mu being very much related to Noah. And that's a big jump for some people, but the archaeological evidence, historical overlays, language, culture, so much of that is very evident. And the kind of eroding and burying of the quote Aboriginal or Native Americans in early American history is, I think there's a lot more to that. And in some of the facts in this article, theories, facts, both go a long way in discussing this. But yes, so let's go. Orestes Bean thinks evidence points to such a conclusion and has written an Aztec play. If Rear Admiral Perry, I've talked about him in my Beyond the Poles story and the Arctic expeditions, and he's a bit of a predecessor to Admiral Byrd. Not a bit, he kind of is, and yeah. If Admiral Perry had returned from the region of the North Pole with an authentic account of finding instead of a field of ice a race of people previously unknown to historians, who had among them the tradition of the flood, of the Tower of Babel, of the passing of their ancestors through the Red Sea, the waters of which divided before them, a people who carried a sacred ark, and had he brought back with him a tablet upon which were written the Ten Commandments in Old Hebrew and accounts of the biblical experiences of the ancient Hebrews, to what conclusion would we would he have come to? Now, as we get farther in Anomalous America, we're going to get into Alabama, where they find a quote Ark of the Covenant in a sacred cave temple, as well as we talked about the Tower of Babel story, its existence in the Mayas, the earliest traditions of it. We also talked about a bit of the Red Sea narratives when it came to some of the quote Aborigines of the American Southwest, and that the Bay or Strait or Sea of California is indeed the Vermilion Sea or the Red Sea. And that when they crossed the Red Sea, they found their way into the Mississippi Valley, the Promised Land or Canaan, what they thought was the Promised Land, perhaps. But yeah, the overlays here, he brings up a lot of points that are we find quite a lot of evidence for. And as we get farther through AA, especially in the Alabama episode, we'll tick even more of these boxes. What conclusion would be possible other than he had found a people whose ancestors had dwelled in Palestine and were possibly the 10 lost tribes of Israel, who had settled there after having journeyed 1.5 years northward from Jerusalem, as recorded in the book of Esdras in the Apocrypha? The world would be quick to accept that theory simply because the discovery of such a people would have been at least as sensational as Cook Perry controversy. After many years of study, I am impelled to the conclusion that the Indians of North and South America are a branch of the Jewish race driven from Palestine under a curse, as were the sons of Ham. In this opinion, I am supported by some of the most illustrious names known to exploration, archaeology, and science. Again, to bring up some other material, I would look at my Lost Tribes Found. It's a story from South America. Gentleman finds what he thought to be a Hebrew lost tribe living underground in a elaborate cave system carved into the mountain, full of booby traps and all kinds of things. Advanced. Uh, the religion was quite intricate and very much related to what we would call, Israelites, and they were practicing Masonic ritual as well as others. I would definitely watch that if you haven't seen that one, as this story will overlap quite well with that video. Where was I? Among the American Indians, there are not only a great many of the old Hebrew traditions, but mute, magnificent monuments left by their ancestors that prove beyond doubt that they are an offshoot of the ancient inhabitants of Palestine. The thought of the Indians being a descendant of the old Jewish race was not at first seriously entertained by the white races, because we have known the Indians a long time, and many believe they have never told us anything about it. Let us see whether or not they have. P. Deroux, the celebrated traveler and archaeologist, relates an experience he had with an old Indian chief. He says the chief gave him an account of his origin, which tallied in every respect with the book of Exodus, except that it was Top Itzin, Top Topiltzin, I'm going to pronounce that wrong no matter what, the great chief who led his forefathers to the border of the sea and struck the waters with his staff, whereupon they divided, permitting his followers to pass through, after which the sea flowed back, drowning the pursuing enemy, of whom nothing had been heard since. The Cherokees had a precious possession, which they called the sacred ark. They believed that this ark contained the spirit of their deity, and they always carried the ark with them on their expeditions of hunting and war. Feeling confident that no harm could come to them while the ark was in their possession, who can doubt that this was an echo of the Hebrew Ark of the Covenant? Columbus found the same tradition among the natives of Cuba. Now, that's incredibly important because as we get farther into the Asia talks, and I've covered a bit of Tartary and who were the Tartar, who were the Manchu, the Mandan, the Mandane, the tribe of Dan. And who did Columbus think or describe when he first set foot in Cuba? Well, he said, I am here. I'm in Asia. I have landed in Asia. Not only the Exodus, but the story of the flood was familiar to them. These natives told the great discoverer of the American continent that when the flood had abated, the great chief ordered sacrifices, that he built a vineyard, became intoxicated on wine, and was disgraced by one of his sons. Some of the tribes told Columbus that they descended from a great chieftain who had 12 sons. Quotations from the book of Exodus and Deuteronomy were written upon a parchment encased within raw hide and covered with pitch, which was found in an old mound in Pittsfield, Mass. In 1815. These quotations were written in ancient Hebrew, indicating that he who wrote them must have been separated from the Hebrew race before their captivity by Nebuchadnezzar. Again, by Nebuchadnezzar. Again, check out my Anomalous America Missouri episode when they find an amazing Egyptian, quote, Egyptian temple below the Mississippi River connecting St. Louis with Cahokia Mound in Illinois. Very similar story written on the walls there. To the captivity. The reason for this hypothesis is that after their captivity, the Jews wrote what is called the modern Hebrew, which has vowel points, apologies, and terminal endings, right? Ancient Hebrew, right? Speaking without the vowels. In the 5th volume of his history, Hubert Howe Bancroft gives a detailed account of the finding of a stone tablet in one of the mounds near Newark, Ohio. We talked about this in my Anomalous America episode on Ohio. On this tablet, written in ancient Hebrew, were the 10 Commandments. This would seem to be conclusive proof that the builders of that mound were descendants of the ancient Hebrew race, since no ancient people, save the Jews, possessed the 10 Commandments. Lord Kingsborough, in his work on Mexican antiquities, says that the Toltecs had paintings representing a garden with a single tree in the midst of it and a woman. It was well understood among the Toltecs that this figure represented the first woman, the mother of the entire human race, who is painted black because she was tempted by the first man to partake of the hidden fruit. And she wasn't painted black, she was black. Perhaps no more poetic legend was ever written than that encountered in Cholula, which ascribes to Chuchigal the unpardonable sin of gathering roses from a tree, which brought everlasting disgrace upon herself and her posterity. In this book entitled American Hebrew, now I've quoted from this book quite often, and maybe in the comments you let me know if you want me to do a deeper dive further down the road into this book. But it's quite amazing. I talk about the author Adair quite often. Adair says that the Cherokee and the Creek tribes in the far past had cities of refuge which offered harbor and absolute protection to anyone charged with a crime until was proven guilty. Is it not manifest where that civic custom came from? Now, this is important too because we were talking about the Ark among the Indians. The Cherokees have the story. Well, so do the Creek, the Greek, the Creek, the Greek. Check out some of my videos with Dr. Longo. The Gulf of Mexico is the true Fertile Crescent, and who were the Creek Indians, and yeah. Is it not manifest where that civic custom came from? Although the language of many of the Indian tribes has degenerated into a jargon, there are many Hebrew words that have persisted among them down all the ages and can even now be heard in some of their sacred songs. Such words as the following were right here. Hopefully, it's legible. I'll zoom in a bit more for you guys. For those just listening, I'll read them out loud. I'm going to read the English words, and then I'm going to read the Hebrew words, and then I'm going to read the Indian words. God, English. In Hebrew, Jehovah. In Indian, Ihu Yawa. Ihu Yawa. Supreme God, Elohim. In Hebrew. In Indian, Elohim. English, cold. Hebrew, Kishia. Indian, Kishia. Sleep, Niumi. Nipawan. Nose, Fo. Fau. Land of Canaan, Canaan. Canal. An idol, Aloha. Hulu. Calvin Cotton, writing in 1832, says that the tribes living on the borders of the Great Lakes had a traditional account of the creation, the flood, and in fact, all of the epic events in the lives of the ancient Hebrews as related in the Bible. How many people know that within walking distance of Lexington, Kentucky, a city lies buried, that catacombs have been unearthed, there revealing mummies in as good a state of preservation as any that ever came out of the catacombs of Egypt? Check out my Anomalous America Kentucky episode where we talk about not just Lexington, but just about every major city in Kentucky lies on top of buried ruins of another ancient race, and that they find thousands of mummies below the ground in Kentucky. It's incredible. Where did the ancient people who buried their dead there acquire the art of embalming, if not from the children of Israel before their exodus from Egypt? Embalming, such as the Egyptians and the ancient Americans knew, implies a sturdy belief in the resurrection of the body and, of course, the immortality of the soul. As Ingersoll put it, the dusty mummies are still waiting for the resurrection promised by their priests. The history and customs of the Aztec race are replete with Hebrew analogies. For instance, barren women were not allowed to enter their sacred places. Also, a mother was excluded from the temples and all places of worship for a certain period after the birth of her child. This was a conspicuous Hebrew custom, as all readers of the Bible know. On every hand, the delvers into America's dim past have encountered evidences following upon evidences that tend to establish the Hebraic origin of the ancient inhabitants of the Western Hemisphere. Both in North and South America, in almost every tribe, the scriptural stories of the children of Israel reappear in one form or another. So the caption, as we popped to another part of this paper, is Traditions of the Red Men, which resemble biblical accounts of episodes in the history of the Jews. It has always seemed to me to be more than passing strange that the American people have taken so little interest in the archaeology of their own country. Yeah. And, me and many others, but that's probably my main focus on this channel, unearth a statue or a tablet in Egypt or Palestine, and the news is spread broadcast throughout the world and read with interest by millions of people. Immediately, some philanthropists come forward with a few $100,000 to finance an expedition to go to the scene of the discovery and dig for more statues. Well, we've talked about this a lot, haven't we? Everything gets bought up and buried. And if there is some kind of um, expedition, it's completely controlled by the government, often the Smithsonian. And that's what makes these 1800s, early 1900s articles so precious, is that it's very grassroots and the information has leaked through to us. And because of this digitization of these ancient accounts and rediscovery of them, I'm able to present them to you. Unearthed the ruins of a temple in Mexico bearing all the signs and symbols that adorn the Temple of Solomon. And the fact will scarcely spread beyond the small circle of scientists immediately interested in this discovery. Ruins, like prophets, are known except in their own country. Powerful. Ruins, like prophets, are known except in their own country. Could that be more the case than what I'm presenting to all y'all? Nevertheless, the American people, I think, are becoming more interested in the rich archaeological field that lies at their very door. There is absolutely no doubt that the ruins of many great cities built by a highly civilized people lie buried in various parts of the Western continents. Cities which in their day were formidable rivals in art and culture of the eastern capitals of Greece and Rome. Well, did Greece and Rome get their foundations here? I think so. It is to be hoped that someone will finance another Curtis has done so much to preserve a magnificent record of the vanishing red man in an effort to solve the mysteries of the civilization of ancient America. Ever since I can remember, the American Indian has held a peculiar interest for me. I wanted to find out all about him. From the time I could read, my bent has been toward literature that would throw a light on this peculiar and magnificent race and whence it came. After I had familiarized myself with the works of the Abelst, best authors on American antiquity, I began in my imagination to repeople the Western world, to summon from their hidden graves great nations like the Aztecs, and to make them live over again their strange unknown lives. Doubtless, this is an enthusiasm that seizes upon every lover of history. Amen. But in my case, it was the romantic side of the subject that appealed to me most. What could be more natural than that I should turn my thoughts into a play? I had applied myself diligently to the study of the Aztec civilization and to play construction. Here was a most striking people with a history as dramatic as that of the ancient Greeks, a warlike race, yet the builders of great cities, a people who some day, when a Rosetta Stone of their hieroglyphics shall be discovered and deciphered, may furnish to history some of the most heroic names and achievements ever recorded. I agree. Amen. In writing my play, An Aztec Romance, I built it around the theme the title implied romance. That is to say, love, but not neglecting the melodramatic, the musical, and spectacular. I selected a period about 75 years BC, at which time the greatest city of the pre Aztec civilization was flourishing. But recently, the remains of a temple have been found upon the site of their former Mecca. This temple is marked with the Masonic symbols that were carved upon Solomon's temple. This fact alone should set at rest for all time the question of the origin of the Aztec people and their forebears. I spent 2 solid years in writing my play, or rather in the building of it, and I think it will appeal to the American people because it is the first play ever written that exploits the ancient inhabitants of America. It has been called by certain authorities a romantic, spectacular melodrama with classic ambition. The consuming, the costuming of the play and the scenic investure will be absolutely faithful to history. My scenic artist, John Young, paid a special visit to the Yucatan to study the architecture of those magnificent ancient ruins, which far surpass in elegance those of Egypt or Greece. The illustrious upon this page, made from skeletons sketches, my apologies, and photos by John Young of characters upon the ruins of Palenque, compared with the Indian war chiefs, do much to substantiate my theory that the American Indian is of Hebrew descent. Now, believing as I do that the American Indians were a branch of the Hebrew race, I have written the play with that thought taken for granted. But I do not want to be understood as trying to force my opinions upon anyone. Amen to that. The first and primary object in writing a play is to interest the theater going public, to embody a series of vivid and interesting characters in a play with plot and scope, irrespective of time or place. We have never before seen the ancient Americans represented on the stage. Many Aztec plays have been written, but none has been produced. Nearly all other people of the earth, both ancient and modern, have been exploited upon the stage. Of recent years, we have had the Darling of the Gods, Ben Hur, Quo Vadis, The Sign of the Cross, The Shepherd King, The Bird of Paradise, but no Aztec play. Race and locality do not have much bearing upon the success or failure of plays. However, so long as they are plays, I believe there is sufficient interest in the strange races that once inhabited this country to justify a pretentious play dealing with the most enthralling theme, and I have put the best dramatic form of which I am capable in my play, an Aztec romance. And that's where it ends. Absolutely fantastic. Um, yeah, kind of like a overarching summary, but I had saved this one who knows how long ago, and rereading it the other day when I was getting ready for my Ohio episode of Anomalous America, it's like his quotes were coming out of my own mouth, and it was fantastic, and I knew I needed to do a little video um, on this paper. So, um, as always, I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. In rereading this one, I just knew I had to try to squeeze this one in. So, again, appreciate each and every one of you. I look forward to reading your comments, and stay tuned for a Radium episode coming up. Have a great day, guys. Bye.